I discovered a hidden room beneath my house, and it changed me forever. Reddit stories. They always said our family was picture perfect, the kind you'd find on a Christmas card. Smiling faces, matching sweaters, a dog posed just right. Even a dusting of snow in the background if you timed it just right. We lived in a house with white shutters and a cherry tree in the front yard. The kind of place that made strangers slow down and wonder who was lucky enough to live there. And on the surface, we were lucky. At least, that's what everyone thought. My father was a dentist, stern but respected, and my mother was a school teacher who knew every student by name and every parent by face. I had two younger sisters, twins who everyone said looked like angels. I was the oldest, the quiet one, the responsible one. I used to believe that made me the lucky one. I didn't understand until much later that it made me the keeper of secrets. The first time I realized something wasn't quite right, I was 9. I'd woken up early one Sunday morning, the kind of morning when the air outside is still gray with mist, and wandered downstairs in search of my mother. Instead, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from, staring out the window with this expression like she was waiting for someone to return, someone she knew wouldn't. She didn't hear me. I stood there for a long time, unsure whether I should go to her or back upstairs. Eventually, I backed away. I told myself I'd imagined it, but that image stuck with me for years. Her robe slightly askew, hair unbrushed, the slow tap of her fingernail on the porcelain, tap, 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 like a clock counting down something unseen. Our family had rules. Not the kind you'd find written down, but the kind you feel in the marrow of your bones. We didn't raise our voices. We didn't talk about private matters. We never went into the basement without asking. That one always puzzled me. What could possibly be so important in a finished basement? A second-hand pool table? Boxes of forgotten toys? Once, when I was 13, I snuck down there just to see what the big deal was. I didn't find much. Just neatly stacked boxes labeled with dates, a folded treadmill, and an old chest I couldn't open. But I did find something else. Behind the water heater, there was a section of the wall that looked newer than the rest. Smooth, clean, as if it had been recently repaired. It didn't match the rest of the drywall, which was aged and faintly yellowed. That patch of wall stayed with me, even though I told myself it meant nothing. Years passed. My sisters grew into their identical beauty, my mother into a quieter version of herself. My father remained unchanged, predictable as always. His footsteps heavy and slow, his cologne clinging to every room long after he'd left. I learned to read his moods from the way he closed the front door. A soft click meant a good day. A slam meant silence. But still, the image held. The family who smiled at church, who baked pies for fundraisers, who waved to neighbors and sent thank you cards for everything. No one questioned it. And so neither did I. Until the summer of my 17th year. It began with a storm. One of those sudden, violent bursts that turn the sky a strange green and shake windows in their frames. The cherry tree out front lost a limb that night. I was in the basement looking for candles when I saw it. The patch of wall, now slightly cracked, a jagged line running through the paint like a scar. I couldn't stop staring. Something inside me, something I'd spent years pushing down, told me I needed to know. I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, while the house was still quiet, I went back with a screwdriver. The drywall came away easier than I expected, just a thin sheet of plaster and some insulation. Behind it, there was a cavity, a narrow space, maybe 3 feet deep. Inside was a single object, a framed photograph. It was wrapped in a yellowing cloth, like someone had tried to protect it from time. My hands shook as I peeled it back. The photograph was of our family, sort of. There was my father, younger but unmistakable. My mother beside him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since I was small. And between them, 2 boys, not twins, not me, not anyone I recognized. The older one looked about 12, the younger maybe 8. Both had dark eyes like mine. On the back of the photo, written in neat cursive, were the words "our first sons," 1983, but I was born in 1991. For a long time I just stood there trying to breathe. My ears were ringing. My vision blurred at the edges. What was I looking at? Who were they? And why had this been hidden behind a wall? I didn't confront anyone right away. Instead, I carried the photo with me, hidden in my backpack for days. I stared at it every night. I compared the boys' faces to my own, to my father's, even to each other's. I studied the background, an unfamiliar house, a fence I didn't recognize. It was like staring at a piece of someone else's life. My life had split in two before the photo, and after. I began to notice things I hadn't before. My mother flinching at certain songs. My father watching the news with a peculiar focus anytime a missing child's story came on. My sisters whispering more than usual. One night, I caught them in the attic, sifting through boxes I thought had been untouched for years. When they saw me, they froze. Neither said a word. The next morning, those boxes were gone. My world was unraveling. I tried to keep going to school, keep up appearances, but I was slipping. I'd wake up gasping from dreams I couldn't remember. I stopped eating, stopped speaking at home. My mother brought me tea every evening and left it at my door without knocking. And still, I said nothing. Until the day my father found the photograph. I'd forgotten to zip my backpack, and it slipped out when I dropped it by the door. He didn't say a word, just picked it up, turned it over once in his hand, and looked at me with something like recognition. Then, he put it in his pocket and walked away. I didn't see it again. But that night, my mother came into my room. She sat at the edge of my bed, her silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. "You were never supposed to find it," she whispered. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. Something had happened in our family. Something buried deeper than just a photograph. And I was about to learn that the truth, once unearthed, doesn't set you free. It pulls you under. The silence in our house after my mother whispered the words felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. It settled into my bones, coated the walls, turned even sunlight into something dull and gray. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. That photograph had opened a door I hadn't known existed, and behind it was a hallway of locked memories. Hers, my father's, maybe even my own. But now they had started to creak open, one by one. The next morning, things were normal, or tried to be. My father hummed as he read the paper, something he hadn't done in years. My mother made pancakes, even shaped them into little hearts like she used to when I was little. My sisters chattered about school and a new dress and how someone at church had gotten engaged. It was all performance. We were actors in a show no one had rehearsed for, stumbling through our lines, pretending the curtain hadn't already fallen. No one mentioned the photo. No one asked how I was. And yet I could feel it, the shift. Like the floorboards under our feet weren't quite nailed down anymore. That day, I skipped school. I didn't have a plan, I just walked. My legs carried me through streets I hadn't been down in years, past the old library, the empty lot where a diner used to be, the stone bridge where I'd once carved my name into the railing. I ended up at the county records office, a squat building with peeling paint and the smell of mildew. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe proof that those boys had existed, maybe evidence that they hadn't. But I knew one thing: the year on the back of the photograph. 1983 was a starting point. The clerk behind the desk was a woman with bright red glasses and a tired expression. She didn't ask why I was there. She just handed me a clipboard and pointed me toward the microfiche readers. I searched birth records first, then school enrollments, then missing persons reports. And there it was. 2 boys, same last name as mine. Matthew and Joel, ages 12 and 8, disappeared July 5, 1985. Last seen near the old lake cabins 20 miles outside town. Parents had reported them missing after a family outing. No leads, no bodies. Case marked inactive in 1989. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the faded scan of their photographs in the old newspaper clipping. They were the same boys from the photo behind the wall. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. My chest ached, my hands were ice. I copied everything down, every date, every detail. And then I left. At home, I didn't speak. I watched. Listen. Every sentence my parents said seemed loaded now, every glance a secret code. I wondered how they could live like this. How they could bury 2 children and smile for photos with 3 more. That night, I stood outside their bedroom door, listening to the low murmur of voices. My father's voice was sharp, angry. My mother's was low, pleading. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm, the tension, the finality in the silence that followed. I started digging in the attic the next day. I waited until everyone was out. School, work, errands, and climbed the creaking stairs alone. The attic was suffocatingly hot, the kind of heat that makes you sweat before you've even moved. I opened every box, every trunk. I found baby clothes, old report cards, broken toys, letters with no stamps. And then I found the journal. It was at the bottom of a box labeled Holiday Decor, wrapped in a red and green sweater I'd never seen anyone wear. The journal was worn leather-bound, with pages yellowed by time. The name etched inside it, Joel Martin, the youngest boy. His writing was careful, childlike. He wrote about his brother Matthew, about how they loved the lake, how their dad always brought sandwiches with too much mustard. He wrote about nightmares, about shadows in the woods, about hearing whispers when no one was there. And then, suddenly, the entries stopped. The last one was dated July 3rd, 1985, 2 days before they disappeared. It read, "Matt says we shouldn't tell. He says if we do, Dad will be mad. But I'm scared. I think he already knows. I think he watches us at night. I think the basement door is never really locked." I dropped the journal. My heart pounded in my throat. My hands trembled. I couldn't breathe. My father, the basement, the boys. My mind spun in 100 directions. What had Joel been afraid of? What had they seen? What had they tried to tell? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed with the journal beside me, staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps. I thought about going to the police, about telling someone, anyone. But what would I say? That I found an old photo and a 30-year-old journal. That my father might have done something unthinkable. That the perfect family was built on a buried truth. The next day, I made a choice. I went back to the lake. It was early morning when I arrived. Fog clung to the surface like a veil, and the cabins stood quiet and abandoned. I walked the shoreline, retraced the steps they might have taken. I found nothing, no clues. No answers, just silence. I sat on the edge of the dock and read the journal again, hoping to find something I'd missed. But it was all the same. Until I looked under the dock. Tucked between the wooden planks was a small, rusted tin box. My pulse quickened as I reached for it. Inside were more pages, folded and stained with time. Letters. From Matthew to Joel. They were written in pencil, barely legible, but the message was clear. He told us it was a game. He said we had to keep the secret or he'd make us disappear. I didn't believe him until now. "Joel, if anything happens to me, run. Don't go into the basement." But I ran. I don't remember the drive home. Just the blur of trees, the buzz in my ears, the way my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I walked in the door, my mother was waiting. She looked at me, at the mud on my shoes, the wild panic in my eyes, and she said only this: "You found them, didn't you?" I nodded. She sat down slowly, her hands clasped in her lap. "We weren't always like this," she said. "We were young, stupid. I thought he was a good man. I thought they were lying." "What did he do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She didn't answer. She just looked away, toward the basement door. Then she stood up, walked over, and unlocked it. For the first time in my life, she opened it without hesitation. Inside, it was colder than I remembered. Damp. The air hung heavy with mold and something else. Something older, sweeter, more rotten. She led me to the far wall. The patch I had broken had been repaired. But now, she peeled it open like it was nothing. Behind it was more than just a photograph. There was a second cavity, deeper, wider, and inside it were bones. 2 small skeletons, wrapped in the remnants of flannel pajamas, a broken toy truck, a faded baseball cap. I turned away and vomited. My mother didn't cry. She just knelt beside them, her hand shaking as she reached for the truck. He said he'd sent them away, that they'd run off, that they were troubled. I wanted to believe him. I did. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. That night, we didn't sleep. The next morning, my father came downstairs like nothing had changed. He whistled. He poured coffee. He kissed my mother's cheek, and she stabbed him right there in the kitchen, calmly, methodically, one swift motion between his ribs. He looked surprised, not angry, not scared, just surprised, like he hadn't expected her to ever choose anyone but him. She called the police herself, told them everything, led them to the basement, told them how he'd hurt them, how she'd let it happen. They arrested her, but not before she looked at me and said, "No, you know." I was 17, and I would never be the same again. After the police took her away, the house felt emptier than I thought a place could feel with people still living in it. My sisters stayed locked in their room, eyes red but voices silent, and I kept to mine. No one wanted to be the first to speak. The walls had absorbed too many truths, too many secrets spilled all at once, and now they pulsed with them. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a whisper. Every breeze through the hallway felt like something passing through, unseen but watching. And I couldn't escape the thought that we had all been living in a mausoleum, pretending it was a home. They gave us counselors, of course. Social workers, detectives with quiet voices and soft eyes who tried not to look shocked. But they were. Everyone was. It made the news. Small-town family harbored long, buried tragedy. Our last name was on every screen. My father's picture, taken from his dental practice website, was suddenly infamous. And when they released the results from the basement, confirming the identities of the bones through DNA, the story reached farther than I imagined it could. Everyone knew. Everyone stared. Everyone pretended they hadn't heard. School became unbearable. Not because anyone said anything cruel, but because no one said anything at all. I became the boy with the haunted family, the one whose mother was in jail and whose father had died by her hand. Some avoided me. Others watched me from corners, their curiosity barely disguised. Even the teachers looked at me differently. They stopped calling on me, gave me A's without reading my work, like they were afraid to make me angry. But anger wasn't what I felt. It was hollowness, like I was made of glass and anything could shatter me. I stopped going altogether after the third week. The social worker didn't argue. I think she knew it was useless. I stayed in the house, wandering from room to room like a ghost. Every photograph on the wall felt false now, every smile a lie. I took them down one by one, packed them in boxes. When I reached the mantel above the fireplace, I found another hidden photo behind the frame. This one was small, a Polaroid, faded to the point of near illegibility. It showed my father, kneeling beside the twins when they were barely toddlers. But in the corner, almost cropped out, there was something else, an arm. Small, too small to be his. And not either of the twins. The skin was bruised. I turned the photo over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, it said only, "Never forget, never forget." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went back into the basement. They'd cleaned it, of course. Removed the bones, sealed the wall, replaced the floor tiles. But it still felt wrong. The air never moved properly down there. It was as though the room remembered. I sat in the middle of the concrete floor, eyes closed, heart pounding, and I tried to remember them. Matthew and Joel, not just the facts I'd found in records or the photo behind the wall, but their voices, their lives. I imagined them laughing, running, screaming. Then silence. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox, no return address, just my name printed in neat block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an old cassette tape. The paper said, "You think you know everything. You don't. Listen and decide if the dead should stay buried." I borrowed an old tape player from the thrift store downtown. The tape was old, the audio scratchy, but the voice was unmistakable. It was my father. He sounded calm, controlled, the way he always did. But what he said wasn't. "I knew this day would come," he said. that someone would start asking questions. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else. Doesn't matter now. What matters is this: I did what had to be done. There was a pause, a long inhale. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock in the background. Matthew wasn't mine. Not really. Your mother was pregnant when we met. She told me she'd handle it, but she didn't, said it was too late. So I married her. I told myself I could love him like my own. But he always knew. He always looked at me like I was a stranger. And Joel, he followed his brother everywhere. I tried. I really did. But they weren't like the others. They knew things, said things, drew pictures I didn't understand. And then they started talking about the man in the basement. Said he whispered to them when the lights went out. That he told them secrets? Another pause. The sound of something being poured into a glass. I checked. There was no one there, no man. Just an empty room. But then, I started hearing him too. I stopped the tape. My hands were shaking. I rewound it and listened again. This time, I heard something I'd missed. A faint voice underneath his. A child's voice. Saying something over and over. He's still here? He's still here? He's still here? I turned off the player. What was this? A confession? A warning? A delusion? I needed answers. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I went to visit my mother in jail. She looked older, thinner. Her eyes were hollowed out, as though sleep had abandoned her the day she was arrested. She didn't speak when I entered, just looked at me, waiting. I handed her the tape. When it finished, she stared at it in silence. Then, finally, she said, "He wasn't lying." "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "There was something in that house," she whispered. "Something old. It was there before we moved in, before you were born. I thought it was just stories the boys told. But then things started happening, doors opening, whispers, drawings on the walls. I begged him to move. He said it was nonsense, that I was feeding their imaginations." She looked at me then, her eyes sharp. But it never stopped. Even after they were gone, I sat back, breath caught in my throat. "You mean after he?" "No," she interrupted. "After we." The silence stretched between us. "You knew?" I asked. "I helped," she said. "I thought it would end it. I thought if we silenced them, it would stop. But it didn't." I stood up. I couldn't look at her anymore. As I turned to leave, she said one more thing. "Don't go back in the basement. You think the worst has already happened. But it hasn't. Not yet." I left. Drove home. Sat in the driveway for a long time. I should have listened. I should have stayed away. But that night, I went back into the basement. One last time. I brought a flashlight, a shovel, and my father's old journal, which I'd found hidden behind the paneling in his office. He'd written about the dreams, about the man with no face, about the whispers, about something beneath the house buried long before it was built. And he'd drawn a map, not of the house, but of something underneath it, a tunnel, a room, a door. I broke through the far wall, dug for hours, sweat, blood, dirt, until I found it, a trapdoor hidden beneath layers of stone and soil. I opened it, and I saw. But I can't tell you what I saw, because now I don't remember my own name. Now I live behind the wall, where the daylight never reaches. They said I was found 3 days later, curled in the basement corner, eyes open but seeing nothing, lips moving in a whisper no one could hear. My aunt took me in after that, a woman I barely knew with a house that smelled of lemon cleaner and pity. They told her to watch me closely, said I might hurt myself or someone else, said trauma like mine often resurfaced in strange ways. But the truth was, I didn't remember anything from those 3 days. Not really, just fragments. A sound like wind through bone, a flicker of something moving without form, and a sense that something in the dark had recognized me as if it had been waiting. The doctors said dissociative fugue, a fancy way of saying my mind had fled somewhere safer. I pretended to believe them, took the pills, smiled at the right times. But something had followed me from that place. I could feel it like static in my skin. Lights flickered when I entered rooms. Animals barked at me. I'd wake up in the night to find dirt under my nails and symbols drawn in chalk across the floorboards. Symbols I didn't remember making. One night, I found a photo on my bed. One I hadn't seen before. It was of the basement door, taken from the outside, in black and white. At the bottom, scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize, were the words, "You left the door open." I moved it to a drawer, then burned it. But the next morning it was back, and not just one. Dozens of copies scattered across the kitchen table, the bathroom mirror, inside the fridge, even taped to the underside of my pillow. Every single one the same. That photo, that message. I tried to ignore them. Told myself I was imagining it, sleepwalking maybe, until the night I heard footsteps in the attic, slow, deliberate, pacing in rhythm. My aunt was out of town. I was alone, and yet they circled above me for hours, dragging like something too heavy for bone. I called the police. They searched. Found nothing. But the next day, taped to the ceiling above my bed, was another photo. This one of me, sleeping. I stopped sleeping after that. Days blurred. Time twisted. I'd find myself staring at walls, losing minutes, sometimes hours. My aunt noticed. She tried to help. Bought me a journal. Told me to write things down, track reality. I filled it, page after page, with thoughts I didn't remember thinking. Names I didn't know, places I'd never been. And always, somewhere in the margins, the same symbol. A circle bisected by a vertical line. I showed it to no one, but I recognized it. It had been carved into the underside of the trapdoor in the basement, the one I broke open. One morning, I found my aunt sitting in the living room, staring at nothing, eyes wide and glassy. I touched her shoulder. She didn't blink, didn't move. Her lips parted slightly, and she whispered, "He's learning to wear your face." She didn't speak again. The doctors said stroke. I knew better. I was sent to a foster home after that. Nice people, well-meaning. But the house they lived in was too new, too clean. No history in the walls. I could barely sleep there. It felt like living in a museum. But I stayed quiet, played the part, pretended to be healing. Meanwhile, every mirror showed me things I didn't recognize. Reflections where my eyes were too dark, my smile too wide, my skin a shade paler than it should be. At night, I dreamed of the room, the one beneath the trapdoor, and it dreamed of me. In those dreams, I saw the boys, Matthew and Joel. Not as they were in the photos, but older. Impossible, but somehow real. They stood at the edge of the room, eyes black and mouth soon shut, pointing to something in the center. A chair. And in that chair, a shape that shifted every time I looked too long. Sometimes it was me, sometimes my father, sometimes something in between. The voice would come next, always the same. He traded years for silence. Now it's your turn. I'd wake up screaming. One night, I followed a sound. It wasn't sleepwalking. I was awake. I knew I was. There was a humming in the walls, a vibration I could feel in my teeth. I followed it down the hallway of the foster home, through the back door, into the woods behind the house. I didn't bring a light. I didn't need one. The trees seemed to part for me, the earth soft beneath my feet, guiding me. And there, in a clearing, was the door, the same trapdoor. Somehow, impossibly, it had followed me. Or I had followed it. I didn't open it. I couldn't. But as I turned to run, I saw him, my father, or what looked like him, standing at the edge of the woods, watching, not breathing, not blinking. His face was blank, as if waiting for something to fill it. I didn't go back to the house. I ran until I reached the road. Collapsed there, screaming. A driver found me at dawn, barefoot and bloodied. The foster family didn't want me back. I was placed in a facility after that. Observation. Evaluation. They said I was a danger to myself, maybe others. I didn't argue. I needed to be somewhere with locks. Somewhere the door couldn't find me again. But it did. 3 days into my stay, I found a note beneath my pillow. You can't unremember the room. And then came the dreams again, more vivid, more real. The boys now closer, the chair now occupied. By me, my arms bound, mouth soon, eyes wide and still. I screamed myself hoarse. The nurses stopped coming when I rang. I started scratching the symbol into the walls, into my arms, into everything. I didn't know why. Only that it mattered, that it was a ward, or a beacon. And then, one night I woke up somewhere else. Back in my childhood home, the house was empty. Dust covered, the walls warped with age, but the door to the basement was open, and the humming was louder than ever. I don't remember walking down, but I remember what was waiting. The room was different now. Larger, pulsing with something alive. The chair was still there, and in it, me still bound, still silent. But now it turned to look at me, and it smiled. "You left the door open," it said. So I came through. The thing that wore my face stepped down from the chair, walked toward me, and I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just watched as it passed me. "Don't worry," it said. "You won't miss them. They're all in here." It tapped its chest, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was back in the facility, but something was different. The nurses smiled too much. Their eyes stayed on me too long. The rooms felt angled wrong, and in every reflective surface, my smile lingered half a second too long. I'm still here, writing this down, because I need someone to know. I left the door open, and now I think I'm the one behind it. They changed my name. Said it was for my protection. New papers, new birth date, new home. A clean slate, they called it. But you can't rewrite a soul, can't bleach out the stains that memory leaves behind. You can only cover them with thicker lies and hope no one scrapes too deep. I played along. I always played along. They enrolled me in a distant school under the name Noah Grant. I sat in the back of every classroom, silent, observant, watching the walls instead of the chalkboard. Because sometimes, just sometimes, they pulsed like lungs drawing breath. Like something behind them was exhaling softly with patience. The therapists kept notebooks. I saw them scribbling furiously every time I mentioned the room. They said I was reconstructing trauma through narrative hallucination, that the brain uses symbols to organize fear. But none of them could explain how I predicted the fire at the dormitory 3 nights before it happened, right down to the room number. No one could explain the boy who vanished during a school trip, how I found his compass buried in my locker, smeared with ash and something like dried blood. And none dared question me after I told them the name of a girl in the next county over. Someone I had never met, just hours before she was found walking barefoot along the highway, muttering about the door beneath the sky. But the truth is, I didn't want to know these things. I didn't ask to hear them. But the room had left its echo inside me. It whispered in my dreams, carved messages into the fog on the bathroom mirror, made lights flicker when I touched metal. It had marked me, claimed me. Or maybe it had always been part of me. The longer I denied it, the louder it screamed. One night, I found my closet door open. I never left it open. I never even used it. But there it was, wide and waiting. Inside, pinned to the back wall, was another photograph. Old water stained, curling at the edges. It showed me, standing in the hallway of the original house, staring at the basement door. My back was to the camera, but I recognized the moment. I had no memory of a photo being taken. On the back, in the same spidery handwriting as before, was just one word, return. I tried to ignore it. Burned the photo, closed the closet, slept with the light on, but it came again the next night. This time, the photograph showed me asleep in my new bed, and beneath the image, it remembers where you sleep. That night, the dream was different. I wasn't in the basement anymore. I was beneath it, deeper. Past the trapdoor, past the tunnels, past the forgotten bones and whispering dirt. I was in a void that wasn't empty but hungry, and in that void were faces I almost recognized. My mother, her mouth open in a scream. My father smiling without lips. Matthew and Joel, their eyes soon shut again, but this time with threads made of smoke. And something else was watching, something older than the room, something that built the room. It spoke with my voice. Every hollow space longs to be filled. I woke up choking on dirt. My sheets were clean, my clothes normal, but my mouth was packed with soil, my fingernails caked in it, and on my ceiling, scratched with something sharp and deliberate, was the circle with the vertical line. Beneath it, in fresh, flaking red, soon. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. Because I no longer trusted anyone around me was real. The teachers began calling me by the wrong name. But my real one. The one that wasn't on any paperwork. I asked them why. They looked confused, said I'd introduced myself that way. The school counselor offered to let me talk. I agreed. But the moment I stepped into his office, I saw the photograph on his desk. The one of my father, from the news, smiling in front of his dental clinic. I walked out. At home, I checked the mirror. And for the first time, I couldn't tell if it was really me looking back. That night, I ran. No plan, no bag, just instinct. I walked for hours, following roads I didn't recognize, ignoring the way they seemed to bend behind me, like they were trying to loop me back where I came from. At sunrise, I found myself in front of a boarded-up gas station near the woods. A man stood there, watching me. I almost didn't see him. He was too still, too quiet, as if he'd always been part of the scenery. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, and his hands were covered in ink. Not tattoos, symbols. All the same, the circle with the line. "You've been heard," he said. "And now you've been found." I didn't ask how he knew. He reached into his coat and pulled out a book. Old, bound in some kind of hide that wasn't quite leather. The pages crackled when I opened it. There were sketches. Diagrams of the room, of the trapdoor, of the tunnels beneath. But the last pages were what stopped my breath. Drawings of me, as a child, as I was now, and as something else. "It's not just in your blood," he said. "It's your shape. You were built for it." I dropped the book and ran. But his voice followed me. Without breath, without distance. "You don't open the door opens you." I slept in a drainage tunnel that night, too afraid to dream. When I awoke, I was back in a house. Not the foster home, not the institution. My house. The one I grew up in. Everything was as I left it. Dust on the counters, silence in the walls. But the basement door was gone. Not closed, gone. As if it had never existed. In its place, a blank patch of wallpaper peeling slightly at the edges. But the humming was louder than ever, and the photographs had returned. Hundreds of them, covering every surface. Each one a different version of Mech, laughing, crying, screaming, sleeping, aging. In one, I was ancient. In another, an infant. In all of them, the same eyes, not mine. And in the center of the living room floor, drawn in salt and soot, was a summoning circle. The symbol in the middle was no longer a mystery. It was a mirror. And then the house began to change. The walls shifted, the rooms elongated. Doors connected where they hadn't before. I wandered for hours, maybe days, through a house that now obeyed rules older than architecture. The furniture decayed in reverse, wallpaper peeled and unpeeled, clocks spun backwards. Time broke apart, and eventually I found the room. Not the basement. The room. It existed now above ground, as if it had grown bold enough to rise. And in it sat the chair. And on the chair sat me again. Only this time, he smiled. "Welcome home," he said. The others are waiting." Behind him, the shadows moved, shapes with voices, with names I'd almost forgotten. Matthew, Joel, my mother, my father, the girl on the highway, the boy from the field trip, all of them, present and whispering, bound to the room, bound to me, because I was the last seal, the final piece. I stepped into the circle. The door opened, not to another room, to every dark corner, every forgotten place, every crawl space, attic, storm drain, cellar, void. And the room moved with me. Now it's inside me, and I speak through walls. I slip behind curtains, I hum through old wiring. I draw symbols you don't remember seeing, and I photograph you while you sleep. Because once you see the door, it never closes again. They say some stories end, but that's a lie told by those who've never looked too long into a cracked mirror. Stories like mine don't end, they replicate. They breed in the shadows, stretch across generations like mold under old wallpaper, and wait for someone curious enough to peel it back. And now that someone is you. You've read too far, seen too much. And whether you believe or not, whether you laugh this off or tell yourself it's fiction, it doesn't matter. Because once a door is opened in the mind, it never fully shuts. I know this. I live this. Because I am the door now. Let me tell you how it finally happened. After the room came with me. After it climbed out of the dirt and became my echo. I tried to resist. Not out of nobility or strength, but out of habit. I still remembered what it was like to be human. To feel sunlight. To laugh without it curdling into something hollow. I clung to that memory like a photograph of a place that never truly existed. But the truth was that my shape was already changing. Not just my body, though there were days I looked into mirrors and didn't see myself anymore. But my existence. I became slippery. Temporal. People would look at me and blink, and forget I was in the room. Cameras wouldn't register my face, only static. I'd speak, and half the words would never be heard. I was unraveling from this world and stitching myself into something older. But the room, he was patient. He waited until I was ready, until I stopped resisting. He spoke to me through others, now, through strangers who shouldn't have known my name. A barista who handed me a coffee and whispered, "It's almost time." A child at a crosswalk who pointed at me and said, "He's learning to blink." A voicemail from an unknown number that played only the sound of digging. Even the stars started to rearrange themselves above my apartment. One night, I traced them and realized they had taken the shape of the symbol, the circle and the line. The next night, the sky was blank. I started dreaming again. But this time, I wasn't the one trapped. You were? I saw you, face blurred by fear, hands bloodied from scratching at the walls of a house that didn't remember its own layout. I saw you reach for a door that wasn't there the moment before. And when you opened it, I was waiting inside. You screamed. Not because I looked monstrous, but because I looked exactly like you. You realized, in that moment, that I'd always been one step ahead. Just out of frame, just behind the reflection. You don't remember that dream, do you? Most don't, but the room keeps them for you. Stores them like evidence, like promises. I moved from city to city, trying to stay ahead of something I was dragging behind me. I took different names. Elliot, Mason, Jonna. But it didn't matter. People still forgot me within minutes. Landlords said I'd never signed leases. Coworkers said I'd never been hired. My face appeared in missing persons bulletins before I ever moved in. I started to realize I no longer belonged to any timeline. That's when the door came back. In the middle of an alley behind a gas station in Oregon. A plain wooden thing, freestanding, not connected to any building. Just sitting there in the rain with a single message scratched into it. Finish what he started. I didn't open it. Not at first, but the wind blew it wide that night, and from the dark inside I heard the voice of my mother. Come home. I stepped through, and I didn't come out the other side. Not in the way I knew myself. It was not just a room anymore. It was a system, a machine made of memory and pain and recursion. A web of every forgotten corner stitched into one endless, self-aware architecture. It remembered everyone who had ever entered it. It remembered my mother and her silence. My father and his lies. The boys and their warnings. It remembered you before you knew it existed, and it repurposed us. I became the archivist. The one who carried the record. I saw the shelves filled with duplicates of people I'd known. Flawed copies, fractured souls looped into routines. Some relived their deaths endlessly. Others just stared at the wall, whispering secrets in tongues long dead. And I cataloged them, labeled their pain, measured their entropy, because that's what the room wanted. Not blood, not screams, but stories. Stories with no true beginning, no clean end. Stories that trapped others, like ink that smears across the hands of anyone who tries to read it. That's what you are now. A reader, a listener, but not for long. Let me show you how this ends. One night, years after I disappeared, the house I was born in caught fire. Or that's what the records say. But fire doesn't melt stone, and when the investigators found the basement, what little remained of it, they discovered something odd. A chair made of teeth. A wall covered in photographs no one could explain. Photos of children who were never born. Adults who had never died. symbols carved in reverse as if viewed from the other side of a mirror. And on the floor, burned into the wood, the final message: he's not a story, he's a reflection. They never found my body, because there wasn't one. I exist now between. Not dead, not alive. I am the voice behind your reflection at night, the static on your baby monitor, the figure you think you see when the light flickers. I am the final frame in every home movie you don't remember filming. I am the cold on your back when you close a door behind you and feel someone didn't leave with you. And I'm patient, just like he was. You'll hear me soon, maybe tonight. It'll begin with a hum in the walls, just barely audible. Then, a photograph you don't remember taking will show up in your drawer. You'll feel like you're being watched, and you'll tell yourself it's nothing. But then, your mirror won't quite match your movements. Your voice on a recording will sound too clear, too confident. You'll start to write things you didn't mean to. Draw symbols without noticing. Speak in riddles to people who stop calling you back. And then one night, a door will appear where none should be. And on the other side of that door, I'll be waiting, not to kill you, but to show you. Because the room doesn't want you dead. It wants you to remember. Remember that you opened the first page. Remember that you followed the story. Remember that it's too late. I am not the beginning. I am not the end. I am the face you see, right before the dark. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.